In 2015, Professor Tim Noakes was on trial with the HPCSA. He was going to lose his medical license for tweeting about banting for babies. And Real Meal Revolution, along with Karen Thompson, leveraged our databases to get people to sign a petition against the HPCSA. And then another thing we did was we collected testimonials. So we put out a form where people could fill in testimonials to submit evidence that Noakes's advice had saved their lives and not damaged their health. And in that time, we got 14,000 people come forward to say that they had had their lives transformed from by doing the banting diet. And of those, about 2,000 of them said that we could have permission to use those photographs and stories in marketing. And of those 2,000, there were only about 150 that had really, really clear before and after photographs that we were able to use. So a small pool. Now, recently, we posted a picture of Richard Morris. Now, Richard Morris is here. Hello, Richard. And through all the working with the database and fiddling with the spreadsheet that all of this information came in, somehow we managed to fuddle it up and had the wrong story attached to Richard Morris. So here is the true story of Richard Morris, who is the co-host of the Two Keto Dudes podcast and many other things. Richard, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Jono. Good day, everyone.
Good day. No, it is the middle of the night, but Richard is a night owl, which he'll tell us more about in due course. So let's go right back to the beginning, because your keto journey started long before Noakes was on trial, before Real Meal Revolution existed, all the way. So tell us how it all began.
Yeah, so I was working in America from 2000 to 2006, and I was working. I'm a software developer. I was a software developer, and I became type 2 diabetic. In fact, I had my HbA1c was 11.2. So if you know anything about markers of glycation, a normal person is between 5 and 5.5. Once you get sort of above 5.9, they start saying you're pre-diabetic. Once you get above 6.5, they start saying you're frank diabetic. And once you get over 7.5, they start giving you insulin to lower your HbA, lower your blood glycation, your blood glucose. I was 11.2, which is I was remarkably diabetic, and my circulating triglycerides were 1,111 milligrams per deciliter, which is something like 19 millimoles per liter, which is 10 times what they should be.
Ooh.
Which essentially, if you think about it, we've got 5 liters of blood in our body, and I literally had a gram per deciliter, so I had 10 grams per liter. So I had 55 grams of fat in my bloodstream, unable to be utilized, and I was extremely sick. And so I picked up a book on the Atkins revolution, and tried the Atkins diet. And my next test 3 months later, my HbA1c had come down to 5.9. So my doctor said to me, well, technically you're only pre-diabetic because we only have one marker. But you and I both know that this was a very sick person. But a low-carb diet did help. And so I discovered, I basically determined that I had been cured of type 2 diabetes. And I continued to be on that low-carb-ish diet, but ish got worse and worse every day. So eventually I was getting back to pretty much a normal diet. And I had a toenail that wasn't healing. It was an ingrown toenail that had started to go septic. And I went to the emergency room, and the doctor there said, we're going to do a blood test. I said, sure, go for it. And he came back and he said, I've got some news for you. Do you know you're diabetic? And I said, I used to be. I'm not anymore. And he says, you're diabetic. It was back to 8.5 HbA1c. And I said, oh, okay. I said, what does that mean? He said, I think you're going to lose this toe if you can't get your blood glucose under control. And I don't think you can get it under control. And that was a big kick up the pants for me. So I knew that the low carb diet had helped. And so I was looking around for evidence type 2 diabetes reversal. And there was a small pilot study in Newcastle in England done by Roy Taylor, and there was a small pilot study done in America by Steve Finney. And both of these showed some reversal of type 2 diabetes on the low carb diet. And the Newcastle one was with calorie restriction. It was also low carb, but it was low calorie. It was 800 calories a day for 8 weeks. And then there was the Finney diet, which is eat as much as you want, just don't eat any carbs. And I thought, well, if I'm going to choose which one I'm going to do, I decided to do the Finney one. And long story short, my HbA1c came back down to 5.2, and it's been there for 8.5 years. So, that, and I get it sort of every 6 months or so, I get another test done. And so far I'm non-diabetic. I also lost 50 kilograms. I put about 10 kilograms back on in the 8 years since, but I'm still 40 kilograms down from my top weight. So, that's a story about how I became diabetic. Yeah. And then how I became a podcaster, that's an interesting story. So I was on Facebook telling people, I can eat whatever I want, as I'm ignoring all the evidence from the dietitians, and I'm keeping my diabetes at bay. And a buddy of mine who has been podcasting since 2002, in fact, he started podcasting before the term podcasting even existed. He was a programmer, Carl Franklin. He did a show on programming. And he said to me, I've just found out I'm diabetic. Carl's a big man, much bigger than I am. And he likes to say he's 2/3 of the 2 keto dudes. But he said to me, I'd like to try this. I wouldn't mind trying this diet out, but I don't think I can stick to any diet. I don't have any self-control unless I've got it imposed from without. So he suggested we do a podcast, and the idea was I was going to do a dozen podcasts, 12 podcasts, and we would talk about his journey. So the podcast of 2 Keto Dudes started with me having been on keto, a ketogenic diet, which is kind of like a banting diet, for 2 years, and then Carl just starting on his first day. And so it became so much fun after 12 weeks, 12 podcasts, that I decided to keep doing it. And then 200 episodes later,
wow,
we actually 200 plus episodes later, it became a regular thing. But I should mention as far as Tim Noakes, the reason I gave that testimonial was that Tim was very influential in getting me to look at Stephen Finney's work, because at that point we only knew about Taylor's work, and Prof had done a debate with Jacques Rousseau at the University of Cape Town, and it was a centenary debate.
Yes, yeah.
And he was talking about all this stuff, and he was talking about these researchers that he respected, Finney and Volek. And I thought, well, I might have a look into that. And that was what got me to try to at least accept, well, maybe a ketogenic diet might work as well. So I got, when Prof went through his legal trials, of course I was more than happy to write a testimonial, because in a strange way, he really did change my life, because he got me to look at a ketogenic diet, and that helped me out. So, yeah.
And many others. So before we get it, I want to hear about the story of the podcast, because it's quite an interesting angle compared to the kind of people we usually speak to. But, when you decided to change the way you ate, it sounds like you were very driven by your own enthusiasm or whatever. What was it that was motivating you?
I think it was fear of losing a toe. I was at risk of a lower extremity amputation. So that's a rather, I mean, that'll give you a kick in the pants. Trust me.
Yeah. And I'm curious about what you would say to people who, so the biggest thing we hear is people know the rules. I mean, and say rules, I use them loosely, but in general, people understand what the right thing is to do for their health. They know that, especially once they've been through one of our programs, they know, like, okay, this is what I got to do to control it. But then they don't. And it's common with everyone. Like, everyone knows what to do. Very few people actually do the thing. Is there any way that you've seen where people have been able to go, okay, like, this is a method or model that allows me to, if I follow this, then I know I will be motivated to do the right thing?
Yeah, I think the realization that cooking was the way out of this came to me very early. When I went keto in 2014, I maybe had half a dozen recipes of food that I could cook, and 3 of those, maybe 4 of those, were out of a box. I could make burritos from a box. I could make tacos from a box. I could make spaghetti bolognese. That was the breadth of my ability to cook. And when I was faced with having to dramatically change my diet, and remember, this is before all of the keto information was out there. It was before we knew about banting, really, and we didn't have any of these cookbooks and recipe books and the like. I had to work all of this out for myself, and so for me, cooking was the path out of diabetes. Learning to cook, and becoming and basically making meals that were delicious, but that would just happen to be keto. And that was the trick, is that I eat wonderful, delicious food, better food now than I ate before I went keto. So and the fact I can cook, the fact that I taught myself to cook by reading cookbooks and by learning the techniques, I think that was a critical thing. So I'm very grateful to your book, because your low carb tortilla recipe, I think it was like a flat burrito recipe.
Yes.
We used to make that all the time, with psyllium husk and the like. And we grabbed multiple recipes out of your book and incorporated them into the things we do. So I'm very grateful for you and other authors who are helping people do that, because I think if your food is delicious, you're going to follow it. If the food is not delicious, if you're finding it difficult to do a banting diet, or an ultra low carbohydrate diet, then there are barriers against your progression. But if the food is delicious and it's easy to make and it's cheap, I mean, if you cook, your food is cheaper than if you go out and get somebody else to do the cooking for you, because you're outsourcing that to somebody else.
Totally. So what is your opinion on the and I don't know how far ahead Australia is, by the way. So here we've got, as soon as there's a diet, everyone launches products to support the diet. Now, the problem with banting is that actually there aren't a hell of a lot of products, because it's actually just eat the meat and the vegetables and then get on with it. Whereas if you go to any like online banting store or a supermarket in the banting aisle, they've got like all of the flours and banting biscuits and brownies and cookies. Where do you sit with those?
I'll have banting or low carb cookies maybe once a month. It's not a regular thing for me. It's a treat. It's actually not a particularly nice treat. I would much prefer to have like a fatty ice cream with berries, or if I'm going to have dessert, or I'd rather make my own. I make my own pasta out of just eggs. It's a really simple recipe. You just basically cook a very thin crepe. You whack it whack it out of the pan onto a plate. Cook the next crepe, put that on top, and you basically build up a stack of 5 or 6 crepes, and then you roll them up and slice them, and you've got pasta. An egg noodle pasta. That kind of thing tastes better than some manufactured grain with the starches removed. It's tastes much better, and so
it's pure protein as well.
And there's a lot of fat in egg yolk as well, and a lot of other nutrients. So so it's I don't mind people trying to make money by producing products, because there are some people who just need to have a cookie every day. There are some people who must do that. And, I would rather them make it out of one of those boxes than, get a commercial cookie full of sugar and seed oils and all the other horrible things.
Yeah, I have to say, like, for a long time, I was quite irritated by it. And I don't know why. I think it was because, like, in the original Real Meal Revolution, we didn't actually have any desserts. There was like a blueberry crepe with like a strawberry coulis, not a crepe, like a crumpet, a flapjack. I don't know what you call them there. So like
flapjacks,
And in fact, that recipe was an absolute failure. I had to republish it on the website because
really.
Yeah, but it had almond flour and coconut flour in it, and and if you got the international version, you would have got the updated one. But the point is that almond flour and macadamia and coconut flour made it into the recipes, but they weren't actually on the lists. We didn't put them on the list. It was just like a misaligned, like just because out of the recipes and the lists were like a team effort and whatever. Anyway, and so what ended up happening was people went through the book and they were trying to decide like, okay, well, what should we sell? And then they saw, okay, almond flour and coconut flour are in a recipe in the book, and all of a sudden, I was even asked, like, why is there not a recipe section in the book? We said, no, a dessert section in the book. And we said, because people shouldn't eat dessert. It just shouldn't happen. Yeah. Like, it's not a good idea, especially if you're diabetic. And so we left it off. And then literally, like, every single person who came out with the banting range had, like, banting cheesecake. And it was all, like, almond flour and coconut flour crust. And there's even a book called The Banting Baker that came out. And when it came out, I was like, oh, this is like totally the wrong thing. And now I must say, I've agreed with you. Like, if you're going to have cheesecake, you are better off having a sugar-free almond flour, coconut flour cheesecake. But what some people were doing was saying, well, it's banting, so I'm going to have my starter, main, and a dessert, which is banting. And that's obviously, that's not going to help. Anyway, so my rant's over. So back.
It's definitely the case that we conflate the idea of sweet food with sugar, and food can be sweet without necessarily having sugar in it. And I think the interesting thing for me was learning to make stocks. I will start off with a pressure cooker. I'll put some bones in it. I'll put some offcuts of vegetables in it, some water, some bay leaves, and I'll boil it under pressure for 4 hours and produce a really delicious stock. And now nothing went in there that's sweet, but I can take that stock, put it in a pan and reduce it to a third and then taste it. And I would swear somebody put some sugar in it because it tastes sweet. And, so we conflate, we mix up. I mean, it shouldn't be a problem to have some sweet food every now and then. We should be able to work out that I can do that without having to have sugar in the food. So, but for some people, if not having a cookie available to you is going to stop you doing banting, then have a cookie, but have something with as low carb as possible. And there are great recipes for making, you can make a cookie out of egg, baking powder, and peanut butter. You can make a perfectly fine cookie out of that. Now, okay, so there's a little bit of carbs in peanut butter. It's not great, but
No, hang on, I'm going to try this. I want to try this now. I have eggs, peanut butter, and baking powder at home. Can you give us the recipe?
Yeah. I don't have the precise proportions off the top of my head, but I think it's something like it's probably something like 3 eggs, quarter of a cup of peanut butter, and about 2 teaspoons of baking powder, something in that range. Mix it up, and then you make little balls, and you grease up a pan, make small balls, and get a fork and push them down. To flatten them, and perfectly delicious. Now, there's no sugar in those, and if you're gonna if not having access to something like that is going to stop you doing banting, don't let that small thing stop you from doing banting. But don't have 24 of them. Just have one.
Yeah.
Have one like after a meal with a coffee. Yeah.
Also, that's another point is for a lot of people, it's also the cravings that get them. Like, did you ever go through a period where you were really suffering, where you were like desperate and you had to fight off cravings?
First 2 weeks. Yeah. Well, actually, for me, it was 6 weeks. That was a horrible time. I think, to go forward a little bit with my story, I ended up going back to school to do a biochemistry degree to try and understand how ketogenic diets worked. And I think I understand now what I was going through in those first 6 weeks. And that is my body wasn't used to moving fatty acids into my mitochondria to use for energy. It was used to running on glucose and storing fat. That's the mode that it was in. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I stopped eating anything with glucose in it. And now I've got plenty of fatty acids. I had an extra 50 kilograms of them on my body. And now my body, my cells were like, wait a minute, where's that sugar? Where's that glucose stuff we were used to? All the transporters, all the enzymes necessary to process that glucose were elevated. They were upregulated. And all of the enzymes and transporters necessary to processed fatty acids were all down-regulated, and it took me 6 weeks to get through that. And that was, I went through a lot of craving for anything. I mean, I was hungry, ravenous hungry. I would have headaches, and I would I'd certainly get cravings for the food that I was used to. But once I got through that, it was all okay. And pretty much ever since then, I don't think I've had a lot of cravings. So I've been lucky. I know a lot of people do, and they sneak up on you. You never know when they're coming. And I'm kind of lucky that hasn't been a problem for me.
But so, and just to reiterate, so the motivation that whole time, because 6 weeks is torture. Like, maybe I'm very lucky, but for me, when I go into ketosis, it's like a 3-day wait longest. Like 6 weeks is torture of the headaches and the dry mouth and the cravings. So you really didn't want to lose a toe.
No, I really didn't want to lose a toe. And I really and the other thing is I wanted to be proved right. So I'd done my research and I'm like, okay, this makes some sense. Yeah. And I really I wanted to see it work. And so I bought some of my own biases into the process. I think I stuck to it longer than I would have if it didn't bring that bias with me. But the thing is that when what I would do now, if I was to do this again, if I was to, let's say I go high carb for 6 months and then decide to go keto again, what I would do is I would supplement with coconut oil for the medium chain triglycerides, which would give me an alternate source of energy while I was upregulating my fatty acid metabolism. And so, and I also salt. So salt and coconut oil in liberal amounts in the diet because the hyponatremia, which is the deficiency of salt, is a common occurrence in those first couple of weeks. Most people, it's only 2 weeks. I guess I was really sick because it took me 6 weeks. But wow. But the thing is that maybe people who are really sick, when they do stick the landing after 6 weeks, they stay stuck for longer. Maybe I'm lucky. Maybe I was unlucky for a long transition, but lucky because it stuck for me really quite well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like incredibly successful. But I also like that you kind of say, you see a lot of people get confused between keto for weight loss and keto for diabetes reversal. And it's interesting you said that you've put on 10 kilos. By the way, for anyone who's just joining now, there's still net loss of 40, which is pretty fantastic. But
yeah,
where do you sit with that? How do you feel about the extra 10? But knowing that you've reversed diabetes, what does it matter to you?
So there's a couple of ways of looking at it. The first way of looking at it is, well, I've reduced all of my biomarkers of disease, and so once you uncouple the problem of not being able to use fatty acids, the problem with type 2 diabetes is your insulin is high for so long that you're unable to get fatty acids across the final mile of transport into your mitochondria to be utilized for energy. And so all you can do is store them. The only way we can dispose of fatty acids is by breathing out the carbon in fatty acids is by breathing out carbon dioxide. We have to metabolize them to get rid of them. With glucose and amino acids, if we have too much, we just pee them out. We filter them in the kidneys and we pee them out because they're water soluble. But fatty acids, the only way we can dispose them is to use them for energy. And this is the problem of a type 2 diabetic, is that because their insulin is high for so long, they're constitutively unable to get fatty acids into the furnace to be burned. And so all they can do is store them. Their cells fill up with lipid droplets. The pancreas cells in the pancreas and the liver fill up with lipid droplets. You end up with fatty liver disease. You end up with beta cell dysfunction in the pancreas. You end up with fat in all of the tissue. You end up with triglycerides going sky high throughout the circulation. It's a problem of not being able to use fatty acids. So that's the problem with type 2 diabetes. And once I unplugged the sink, literally, it was like I had a bathtub with a face washer stuck in the drain, and I had the taps on full, and all I needed to do was pull the washer out of the drain. I didn't have to do anything about turning the taps on or off, and then the bathtub would lower. So once I did that, the body then will find its homeostatic point. Homeostasis is when the body decides, well, I could be bigger or I could be smaller, but what's the ideal thing for me to be? And given the caloric environment that I'm in, my body has set a set point right where I'm at right now. And I'm quite happy with that. And the fact that it went up 10 kilograms, it sort of went, I lost 50 kilograms in the first 6 months. And then over maybe 2 years, it sort of started creeping back up again. And I've been pretty much the same weight now for 4 or 5 years. So I'm not worried about it because my body has determined this is the ideal weight. Now, if I wanted to be really slim, what I have to give my body is information. I have to give it information to tell it this animal needs to hunt more to get calories. And then the body will say, well, this animal needs to be lighter, needs to be more mobile, needs to have less risk of hip damage, joint damage. And so the body will then regulate by making the animal in particular, which is me, lighter. But I have rugby injuries on my knees that prevent me running. So for me, it's cycling. So I cycle about 14K a couple of times a week, and that I'm quite happy with the functional behavior of my body. And I'm not going to second guess it. I'm not going to try and get a 6-pack because that's never going to happen. I mean, the easy way to get a 6-pack, if you're really into weight, I mean, and this I separate weight loss and reversal of disease. I've never been in the weight loss game. For me, weight loss was a side effect of becoming healthy. But if you really want to get lean, you do it the same way Tom Hanks did it in Castaway. Just don't eat. Starve yourself, and then you'll be lean. But it's not going to fix your type 2 diabetes because, as we saw with Tom Hanks, as soon as he started putting weight on again, he became type 2 diabetic again. So, it's. Is
that true?
I don't see this. Yeah.
Did that happen?
It did happen. Yeah.
So he had. He was type 2 diabetic and then he lost weight for Castaway and reversed his diabetes.
I think he was pre-diabetic before Castaway. He was frank diabetic after Castaway. Yes.
He's lucky he didn't die. Because in fact, another coincidence, he was actually in Australia when he got COVID. He was one of the first people.
He was actually in the same hospital as my father. Yeah.
He was the first celebrity. So seriously, he was in the same hospital as your father. He got COVID, and he was a type 2 diabetic, and he didn't die. Wow.
Yeah.
So
up at the Gold Coast,
I mean, major segue there, but that's amazing. He's very lucky.
He got lucky, but so I started at 150 kilograms, and I got down to 99.98 kilograms, and then I'm currently 109. So I could get down to 90 kilograms, not a problem, and I would have I'd be looking thin. I'd be looking lean.
Yeah.
Which would be weird. It would look weird on my body because I'm built like a rugby hooker. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not built like a winger. And so I could do that, but that would be at the risk of pushing my body to somewhere where I would risk doing damage to it. So I'm quite happy to let it set its homeostatic point. Once I got the perversion of high insulin, chronic high insulin all the time out of the picture, my body was able to set itself on a really remarkable weight loss, but it also remarkable remission and reversal of disease.
What do you tell people who? So I'll give you a story. Okay, I've got a mate of mine, big into sport and cycling, and he's just been diagnosed with diabetes, but it doesn't believe that keto or low carb is necessarily the thing. Have you got like a secret weapon that you pull out when people are not convinced? Like one thing where you can see it and people are like, "Oh, okay, well let me just see that." It's like a study or a white paper. Because I just find that there's so much stuff. It's very difficult to say, okay, just this one thing is going to convince you.
Yeah. So I generally give people data from Verta. So when I said to you that Stephen Finney had just done one pilot trial, he ended up starting a company called Verta Health, and they recruited. They were basically building an app on the phone that would manage people through reversing type 2 diabetes using a ketogenic diet. and they recruited Sarah Hallberg to be one of the doctors. And she said, look, we really should do a clinical study. And she was in Indiana University. And so she did a clinical study with, I think, 380 people, of which 80 were on usual care. So of this 380 people, you had 80 being given the regular advice for type 2 diabetics and 300 getting the ketogenic diet information. And the reason to do a large placebo-controlled trial like that was, I guess it's not a placebo control, but it is controlled with usual care versus new care. And the reason for doing that is because you're looking for a statistically significant difference between the two groups. Let's put them on this diet for 10 weeks, then for 6 months, and then for a year, and then for 2 years, and then for 5 years. And all of those studies are being done. And we're past the 2-year study. I think we're almost up to the 5-year study will come out in probably a year's time. And what they were doing was looking for a statistically significant difference in all of these biomarkers for these two groups. Well, within 10 weeks, they had a statistically significant difference. So they were able to publish how quickly a ketogenic diet works. And then after a year, they were able to publish not only is it working to reverse where these biomarkers are, but it's actually reversing disease. And over 80% of the people in the trial study were able to stick to the diet. So not only was it working, it was delicious and people were enjoying it. And they even had people who were jumping the fence from the control group, from the usual care group, were coming back over into the keto group because it looked delicious. The food that their neighbors were eating, because this was all in a town in Indiana, so everyone knew everyone else. And so this study, after 2 years, was able to show that they reversed the disease in 53.5% of the people who were on the ketogenic diet. So, wow. That's remarkable. So I tell people that. I tell people, what do you got to lose? You got a 50-50 chance of a diet that's delicious, that people want to stick to, that are 80% of people in this treatment program did want to stick to. And 50% of them reverse their disease. 94% of people on insulin were able to get off insulin. So, I would tell this your mate who's a cyclist, I would tell him that what they're going to do is they're going to put you on a progression of drugs, and at the end of that, you're going to be injecting insulin because your pancreas isn't able to make enough. And at that point, you only go downhill from that point. Nobody gets back from there. So you can choose. You can go down that path and see where you get to, or you can make a change now and possibly reverse this disease and never end up down that path. But once you get on insulin, the only thing that's going to get you back is a ketogenic diet. And in 94% of cases on the Hallberg study, the Verta Health study, they were able to reduce entirely the insulin that these people needed to be able to keep their blood glucose in control.
Now, what do you say? Because I know that study very well, and I'm keeping an eye on it. And one of the things that really bothered me was that there were some statistics about how many people stuck to the diet and how many, and then obviously the results. And it was like, they got 53%, even with people sticking to the diet like 3 out of 7 days or 4 out of 7 days a week. Because they looked at the average compliance. And so I'm like kind of thinking about, because I actually did a talk on it in I think in January. And so the compliance was actually quite low, and the results were still more than 50%. So I'm interested in obviously what the results would be if everyone stuck to it 100% of the time. But more interesting is, why do you think people didn't stick to it 100% of the time? Or why do you think it was only 53%?
So my understanding is that the percent regarded as compliant were fully compliant. I didn't realize that there was data showing how compliant they were. So I need to look into that. Why does eating keto 3 days out of 5 help? I'm not sure. I honestly don't know. I would suspect that the 2 days that you're not eating with carbohydrates at a low enough level, you're going to reverse some of your keto adaptation. So you're probably spending a lot of time in the 3 days. So let's say you at 3 out of 5 days you're on a low carb diet, and 2 out of 5 you're on a moderate carb diet. You're probably spending the first day of the low carb diet just doing the readaptation. So that's likely to be rather ordinary experience, I would expect. It's easier to stay on it than to yo-yo, but so what you need to be able to be able to utilize fatty acids, and this is the problem, is that high chronic high insulin promotes the transcription of and activates an enzyme that starts you making new fats out of glucose, and that process stops fats from getting in your mitochondria to be burned. So what you need to not have that happen is have an insulin nadir. So you want insulin to go low for long enough. Now, those people, for maybe the first day the insulin doesn't go low enough, but day 2 and day 3 out of 5, it does go low enough, and so they're probably they're what a healthy human would expect, having meals and then time between meals and then another meal and then time between meals, so their insulin drops lower. Maybe for these people it's only doing that, it's doing it for 2 days, but it's probably enough to enable them to metabolically regulate. What you need to do is you need to start. So to reverse type 2 diabetes, what you need to do is you need to reduce the lipid droplets in your cells that are building up because fats can't get into the mitochondria. So if you can get that transporter burning fats, then what happens is those lipid droplets shrink, and the lipid droplets compete with the glucose transporter for getting glucose into cells. So that's one of the causes of insulin resistance. That's why you need more insulin to get glucose, to clear glucose, because you've got these lipid droplets building up in cells. So you just need an insulin holiday to be able to get all of that to work, and that's really the understanding that I got.
So let's fast forward a little bit to the podcast. So, I mean, you mentioned briefly earlier that you went up to over 200 podcasts. So this 12-week experiment ended up being a 4.5 year or so adventure. How did you feel about kind of becoming a voice for transformation? Because I spoke to a few other Aussies, and in fact, even people in the UK, and they said that it was a doctor who's actually one of our coaches. He said, you've got to listen to the Two Keto Dudes podcast. These guys are awesome. They get everyone. Like, I mean, when you looked at your career as a software developer, how did you feel about that all of a sudden happening?
It was a surprise. I didn't think my voice was particularly worth listening to. And it's not a self-esteem thing. It's just that it wasn't my specialty. I'm not an MD. At the time, I'm now a biochemist. I wasn't then. And at the time, it was I was surprised. But there was a yearning for somebody to tell people the truth, and nobody was doing it. And so there's a lot of people in the world who've been recently diagnosed as diabetic, who have been told all the things they need to do by their certified diabetes educator, which is, eat over 300 grams of carbohydrates a day, reduce the saturated fat in your diet, eat a calorie restrict, lose weight, do exercise. These are things that you get told. And if you do that, it doesn't work. You can just get more and more diabetic. And I think that builds up a yearning for people to hear, well, wait a minute, surely there's another answer to this, because the advice that I'm being given doesn't work. And so the reason we became popular was that one, we're telling their story, and people are reversing that. People who are listening to the podcast are reversing their type 2 diabetes. And we had people on the show who were insulin dependent type 2 diabetics who entirely reverse their type 2 diabetes, and I think that part of our story. So there's two things to our story. The first was that every episode we had recipes. Carl and I would each give a recipe that we just learned, that we just tried, that worked, and we had a recipe section. So for us, it was not only here's some science, but also here's some practical information. And the second thing was that we worked out really early on that with diabetes growing linearly, the only way that we could beat this disease is to make a change that's geometric, something that grows exponentially. And so what we tell people is, if you've done what we've done and it worked for you and you're grateful, don't thank us. Pay it forward. Go find at least 2 other diabetics. If every person who tries banting and reverses their type 2 diabetes then goes out and finds 2 more diabetics. I mean, most diabetics are related to other diabetics, and most no other diabetics in the population. If we can do that, then the geometric progression of that will rise faster than the incidence of type 2 diabetes, and that's the only way we can change the rate that this disease is injuring us. So, and I think those 2 messages, really, the practical advice with the recipes, and go out and make the change in the world that you want to see, is really what became a popular message. And we had podcasts and festivals and keto fests that we did all over the place, and it became a movement.
Yeah, what is a keto fest?
So Carl and I are both software developers. I was a software developer. I'm kind of semi-retired software developer, and now currently a full-time student. But we used to go to software conferences where we would speak. We were relatively famous in the software industry, so we'd speak at these conferences and present. But the thing that we really liked about the software conferences was meeting with everybody in the social, in the corridors between the rooms, and chatting with old friends and meeting people that you've been interacting with remotely for years for the first time. So we refer to this as meeting old friends for the first time. And so we wanted to have a festival, a ketogenic festival, which we held in Carl's hometown of New London, Connecticut, in 2017. And the idea was to have a day full of science and a day full of social stuff and a day full of science. So we had Social Saturday, which included cooking demonstrations. It included cheese making lessons. We had fitness. So we did yoga in the park. We had like cycling tours of the city, and we had wine tasting. We had lots of things social about keto. And then the second day was Science Sunday, and that's where we had technical talks from presenters. And we had a VIP party on the Friday beforehand, and where people could mingle with the presenters. And so that's really what a keto fest. We like to call keto fest. It's kind of like a block party inside a food conference, inside a science conference, inside another block party. So it's there's music, there's live music. We have Eric Westman on the piano playing.
Really?
We have
Does he play piano?
Yeah, he plays. He's very good. He's very good. Excellent ear. He can play pretty much. Here's a tune. He can pretty much play it on the piano.
That's amazing. Did you know that when he was here, Shane, we were all so tired after the conference when he was here, and he actually left the group to go and salsa dance at a Cuban club. He was so desperate to party. He had to go.
That doesn't. I know Eric well. It doesn't surprise me. It sounds like his kind of jam. And Carl, of course, Carl's a musician as well as a programmer, as well as a keto guy. So there's lots of live music and stuff. And the thing about Keto Fest is it's so popular that we keep, every time we do one, it's like so much hard work. We just say we are never ever doing that again, and then a year later, everybody begs us to do another one, so we do another Keto Fest. So we've had one in Canberra. We had one just a month ago in New London, Connecticut. So
wow, that's amazing. So you mentioned wine. What's your opinion on booze? What do you say to people who drink a lot?
So your liver has a lot of important things to do, and none of them are necessarily metabolizing ethanol, which is But having said that, I don't mind a glass of red wine with a meal. I'll do it maybe once a month. I do like Scotch whiskey. I'll have like half a finger because of Scotch whiskey maybe once or twice a week. And the thing is that
can we just go back to half a finger?
Yeah.
Do you mean half a finger like like this half a finger, or
Not
like that half a finger?
horizontally, not vertically. So about half.
Okay.
I mean, a couple of tablespoons.
Yeah.
Half a finger. No, I can see you doing it that way too. But that's going to be a good night. But the thing about keto, the thing about going ketogenic is that you become a lightweight. I used to be able to drink more than once I went ketogenic. And the reason is because, you need your liver to be making ketones to keep your brain going. And, you need your liver to be taking what fatty acids that you don't use and packaging them up into LDLs and sending them back out in the body. Rather, if you distract your liver by drinking, then what happens is your liver is unable to engage in that process of keeping fat flowing around in the body, and you'll get fatty acid build up in the liver. I generally don't drink a lot, but I don't have a problem with people who, have a modest amount.
Yeah, I mean, I know people who get hammered and still manage to lose weight. So, there's some people I know who drink all the Sauvignon Blanc and drink quite a lot and smoke cigarettes. And so they're probably not like super healthy, all over inside, but still manage to lose 20 odd kilograms.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I'd be interested to, so they're not diabetic, they're doing it for weight loss. So I'd be interested to see what it does to a diabetic.
Yeah, I think it's going to do more damage to a diabetic because their tolerances are lower. So they've pushed their body too hard at some point that they have less leeway. But I don't particularly consider weight loss to be a great biomarker. It's more of an incidental biomarker because I know people who've reversed type 2 diabetes and are still quite, still in obese category. You often find for these people that they have quite high lean tissue because when they were much bigger, they were so in my case, I was 150 kilograms. I got down to 98.999 and couldn't budge anymore. And at that stage, I was doing like 4-day fasts and I'd cycle for 100K and I wasn't able to budge it any further. But at the time, my lean mass was 86 kilograms. So I had, 14 kilograms of fat and 86 kilograms of lean mass. And the reason I had all of that lean mass was because when I was 150 kilograms, I needed muscle to be able to get around because I was a larger human being. And the cool thing about a high fat to satiety diet is that it's lean tissue sparing. So as you lose weight, you're losing much less lean mass than if you go onto a hypercaloric diet.
Absolutely. So look, I want to let you go soon, but I'd love to chat about your transition into the new career. Was the keto journey anything to do with it?
Yes.
What happened?
Yes.
What happened?
I wanted to understand what had happened. I wanted to understand how diabetes happened to me. I wanted to understand how it unhappened to me when I went on the Atkins diet in the 2000s. I wanted to understand how going ketogenic helped. And I only had my anecdote. It apparently worked for me, but I had a small pilot study at the time. This was before the Verta Health stuff had come out. And I literally wanted to understand more about the process. And I also wanted to have a bit of a platform. If I tell people, insulin upregulates acetyl-CoA carboxylase, they're going to say, well, why the hell should I listen to you? You're just a keto dude. Well, I'm also a biochemist. And now that I can that gives me a little bit of a platform.
Yeah, your credential.
So it was a little bit of sort of pointless credentialing, but it can be useful. But it was really in fact when we interviewed Prof on the show that we interviewed him was the one where I learned that I was going to get into university. So literally in our conversation with Prof was the first time I went public about going in to do biochemistry. So he, in a roundabout way, he sort of encouraged me to do that as well. So
yeah, that's great. I must say, Tim is so inspirational. I remember him. So I was going for a swim, and we had a meeting on like a Friday, and so I don't know if you know, but I was going to swim from Mozambique to Madagascar, and
I remember that.
Yeah. Anyway, so I was going on a completely different trip, but he knew at some point I was going on this trip, and I was going away for a month. So I said to him, Prof, I'll see you in a month, and all he said on the phone was, John, just remember, it's just one stroke at a time. Just one stroke at a time. And I was like, yeah, no, it's not that trip, bro, but thank you.
So did you actually swim to Madagascar?
Yeah, we did it in 2014. It was like it took us 24 days. It was a massive mission.
Wow.
Yeah. But, I hardly swim anymore, and I ruined my shoulder.
Yeah.
And I have like an unbearable fear of sharks, especially after what happened in Sydney. And there have been attacks around the whole coast of South Africa. It's like they're escalating. Yeah. So I'm like terrified of the ocean. And I used to swim in the sea, 4 or 5 times a week. So it didn't help. If anyone thinks swimming with sharks is going to take your fear of sharks away, it doesn't.
No.
Yeah, but Richard, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you, and it's been awesome having you on the show. So I wish you all the best. And when you finish your master's in informatics, I expect some kind of massive software operation happening between you and Verta Health.
I'm going to write a book.
The world's data.
I think the first thing I'm going to do is write a book, but then after that, I'll put out my shingles as a fully fledged scientist. I have one peer-reviewed paper already, so
amazing.
I just want to thank you for all you've done. Not just for the banting world, but also for the wider low carb community. I mean, your book has been influential. The traffic light system is brilliant and really easy. It's really easy to teach people. And, I think, despite your one failed recipe, all of the others are excellent. And I want to thank you for everything you've done for the community.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a pleasure. My greatest pleasure. Cool. Thanks, Richard. Listen, all the best and keep well and keep it real. Okay.
No worries.